Hey guys, it's Clay here, and I just finished reading the best book ever. And that's a lot coming from me because I usually don't like reading, and I hardly ever finish the books that I start unless it's for school. So I'm pretty proud of myself, especially since this book was 1,089 pages long. So this amazing book that I read was 11/22/63 by Stephen King. So, in this video, I'm going to be reviewing this book, but before I start, I would like to say that for the most part, this video will not have any spoilers, except at the very end, and I will warn you again before then. So, 11/22/63 tells the story of a young English teacher named Jake Epping, who is living in a small Maine town in the year 2011. So, at the beginning of the book, Jake visits the local diner, which is owned by his friend Al, and then Al pulls Jake aside and leads him to the diner's storage room and tells him that there is a time travel portal in the storage room that transports you back to the year 1958. So, here's how the portal works. Every time you go back in the portal, you go back to the exact same date in 1958. And here's a really important thing to the story. Each time you use the portal, you reverse everything you changed the last time you were in the portal back to the way it was, if that makes any sense. So, anyway, Al's life's work has been doing research so that he can use the portal to go back to 1958, live for 5 years in the past, and then prevent the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. Roll credits. So, Al believes that if Kennedy hadn't died, the world would be a better place because by preventing Kennedy's death, he believes he'd prevent the Vietnam War and all sorts of other tragedies. However, Al won't be able to complete this mission because he has terminal lung cancer, and he definitely does not have 5 years to live. So Al asks Jake if he will go through the portal and spend 5 years living in the past, preparing to stop Lee Harvey Oswald, the man who supposedly killed JFK, from doing so. At first, Jake is obviously like, WTF, bro? Like, he can't believe what Al is telling him. But after getting over the initial shock, Jake agrees to go back in time and save Kennedy. So during the 5 years that Jake lives in the past, he ends up living all over the United States, following the trail of Lee Harvey Oswald. During this time that Jake travels around, he changes history in smaller ways too by attempting to prevent tragedies like the murder of his friend's family and the paralysis of a young girl. So eventually, after he's lived in Maine, Florida, and New Orleans, Jake moves to a small town in Texas called Jody, and in the year of 1960, and he gets a job as an English teacher at the high school there. He feels right at home in Jody, and he falls in love with another teacher named Sadie. It's obviously a complicated relationship since Jake is from the future. So throughout the next few years, Jake falls more and more in love with Sadie, and he's soon conflicted between Sadie and his fantastic and happy life in Jody and the mission he'd actually come to the past to complete, which was to kill Lee Harvey Oswald and save JFK. Like I said at the beginning of the video, this was a phenomenal book, and it was no doubt one of the best I've ever read, and I'm really picky when it comes to reading, so I obviously loved so many things about it. However, as is with anything, there were both things I liked and disliked about the book. So first off, I'm going to start this off on a positive note with the things that I did like about 11/22/63. So the first thing I liked about the book was the premise. I'm a huge history nerd, and my favorite period of time to read and learn about is American history from the Great Depression onwards. So I think 11/22/63 was a great piece of historical fiction. Stephen King obviously did a lot of research for this book, and it was just very historically accurate and full of accurate facts. Everything in the book was so well researched and historically accurate, like I said. In his writing, King even used dialogue and mannerisms from the time period. I think this book was just super fantastic. I really got sucked in, and I felt like I was actually living in the late 50s and early 60s. I also love the idea of alternate history and going back in time to stop major historical events and just how changing the past would affect the future. I've actually thought about this before, and as soon as I heard there was going to be a book about a guy going back in time to stop the assassination of JFK, I couldn't wait to read it. And I'm happy to say I was not disappointed. Another thing I loved about 11/22/63 was the amazing descriptive word choice. Although it made the book longer, I think King used the many pages to describe everything from the characters to the events to the settings in such great detail with such great word choice. Everything was described so well that I could just truly imagine it in my head and really get lost in the book. Since everything was described in so much detail, I was able to vividly imagine and almost experience all of the sounds and sights and smells in the story in the way that Stephen King intended. I almost felt like I had actually stepped into the role of Jake Epping and I was going on an adventure back in time, as cheesy as that sounds. Something else I really loved about this book were the characters. King used the many pages in his novel to describe every character down to every last detail, and he gave all of them backstories, likes, dislikes, mannerisms, motives, and even real human flaws. Every character had such a unique and relatable personality, and they all felt very realistic. There was something in each character that I feel I could relate to, and I felt that I got to know the characters pretty well throughout the book. This made me just naturally root for them and want the best for them, which made all the devastating twists and turns all the more emotional. Overall, Stephen King made his characters so human and layered that I even found myself having a soft spot for his version of Lee Harvey Oswald. Yet another thing that I loved about this book was the fast-pacedness of it. Even though this book was, like I mentioned a few times, 1,089 pages long, it didn't feel this long because I was never really bored with it. The book was just so full of nonstop action and uncertainty that I just kept needing to get to the next thing and see what happens next until I reached the end. So I ended up finishing this book in just under 3 weeks. So one last thing that I absolutely adored about this book was Sadie and Jake's freaking adorable love story. It is so touching and it just felt so genuine, unlike most of the love stories today in teen literature that just feel so forced. Sadie and Jake, they sacrifice so much for each other throughout the book, and when something horrible happens to Sadie, Jake just loves her just the same, showing us that love goes beyond external beauty. And in the end, this is what it comes down to. Sadie and Jake were just goals. As you guys can pretty clearly see, there was so much I just loved about this book. But now I'm going to tell you about some of the minor flaws. So one thing I didn't really like about 11/22/63 was the extreme, mega length of it. It was just very intimidating. I feel like there was some filler content that didn't really have anything to do with Jake saving Kennedy, such as when Jake spent time living in Florida and his 5-week adventure to save Carolyn Paulin from getting severely injured. So for the most part, though, the length was not really a huge problem for me, which actually kind of surprised me. So I think that even though there were many scenes in this book that felt like filler and did not really directly have anything to do with Jake's ultimate goal of saving Kennedy, these scenes helped me to better understand the world of the 1950s and 60s and really get to know the characters, especially Jake, inside and out. So I've concluded that for me, every single page of the book was actually worth the read, so I guess this wasn't so much of a dislike. A second thing that I disliked about this book was that there were some parts that definitely confused me. I mean, due to the fact that the book was just so long, there were so many dates and characters and locations to keep straight as Jake traveled across the country and met all sorts of people. It might have been easier if there weren't 2 characters named Mike, 2 named Sadie, and 3 named George to remember too. So that's just a funny bit of information, I guess. I would also have to say that for me, sometimes the wording was confusing, and sometimes I would have to go back and reread passages until I understood them. There were also some very, very obscure historical references, events, dates, people that I had never heard of before. King didn't really explain what these events and historical references were when he introduced them into the story. I think he just kind of expected that all of his readers would know what he was talking about. I did find a super simple solution, though. Whenever I came upon a word or a historical reference that I didn't understand, I would simply Google it and I'd just be like, oh, that's what that is. And I think it's also worth mentioning that Stephen King geared 11/22/63 towards adults, and I'm only a 9th grader. And this could easily be the reason why the book contained vocabulary words and historical references that I was not familiar with. Okay, so this review is not quite over yet. There's one more thing I disliked about the book. However, in order for me to share my feelings on it, I will have to give away some major spoilers. So if you're currently reading 11/22/63 or plan to do so, you should probably pause the video right here. Be sure you watch the rest of it, though, once you're finished reading. So, if you don't want spoilers, thanks for watching, and end the video now. If you are okay with spoilers, keep on watching. Spoilers ahead. Proceed with caution. Alright, so my very least favorite part of the novel was the ending. Not only did the last about 100 pages feel rushed, they were also unrealistic, confusing, depressing, and they just all around sucked. And this is really unfortunate too, because the book as a whole was so fantastic. Here, now I'm going to summarize this horrible and crappy ending from its very beginning. So, at the end of the book, Jake arrives at the book depository, which is the building where Oswald is going to shoot JFK, and he arrives there just minutes before Oswald is going to do the deed. And even though Jake urged Sadie to stay home from this dangerous mission, she also tagged along and is following right behind him. So Jake shoots at Lee Harvey Oswald a few times and misses. And then Oswald fires back at Jake, but Jake trips to his knees, and then the bullet misses him and hits Sadie, who was just right behind him, and she dies. And it's really, really sad. So Oswald is killed very soon after, and Kennedy lives to see another day. But this part is absolutely heartbreaking, and I nearly cried, and I don't cry very easily. Jake, he just sits there with Sadie dying in his arms, and this is just so sad because Jake and Sadie were just meant to be. Also, just a few chapters before this, Jake reveals to Sadie that he is from the future, and the two of them actually plan to go back through the portal together and get married and live together in 2011. And now that's how I think the book should have ended. That would have been so amazing. Instead, though, after Sadie dies, Jake is interrogated by the FBI, and the FBI, they basically tell Jake to go off on his own, disappear, and just never be heard from again. It's like in Lion King when they're like, run, run away, Simba, run away, and never return. Yeah, and I think this is very unrealistic how the FBI handled this. Like, what FBI just tells someone to go disappear into a secluded life? So anyway, Jake follows the FBI's orders and disappears in a way that they couldn't have even imagined. Now that he has completely, been successful in his mission of saving John F. Kennedy, Jake goes back through the portal into 2011. But the 2011 Jake returns to is nothing like the one he left behind. Somehow, by letting JFK live, Jake set off a chain of just terrible events. In the past 50 years, Kennedy's not dying ignited a butterfly effect of nuclear war, insane terrorism, and extremely destructive earthquakes all over the world. Like, whole countries have been blown off the map or fallen into the sea. So many people have died, businesses have been run down, and technological advancement has gone in a completely different direction. The people who are still alive are badly sick and disfigured from nuclear air and radiation, so they all stay in their homes fearing to leave due to unsupervised crime. So everyone in this version of 2011 is preparing for the apocalypse, basically. And this is definitely a part of the book that I kind of hated. I was really excited to see what a realistic interpretation of the world would be like if Kennedy had not been assassinated. And this sci-fi apocalyptic 2011 was not realistic at all. I don't think that Kennedy living a full life could have caused all earthquake hell to break loose, so I'm very disappointed in this part of the book. After Jake sees how crazy this alternate future is, he knows he must go back through the portal and reverse everything back to the way it was before. So Jake goes back to 1958 in the portal, and that means, let me remind you, that he basically hit a reset button and erased all the changes that he made to the past in the 5 years that he lived there. This means that Kennedy will be assassinated as planned, and Jake and Sadie will have technically never met, which breaks my heart. And this was a huge letdown for me because Jake basically wasted his 5 years changing the past only to have it almost immediately changed back. So after Jake reverses the past back to normal, he returns to the normal version of 2011, and then he drives from his home in Maine to Jody, Texas, and in Jody, something that I actually thought was amazingly bittersweet happens. Jake finds Sadie, who is now 80 years old, and they slow dance together. And Sadie says that she feels like she knew Jake from somewhere, and he replies with something like, "I knew you in another life, baby." And it was actually so cute, even though that wasn't entirely the ending that I wanted. I think King managed to end the book on a very sweet note. Overall, even though I didn't particularly like the ending, I would still say that 11/22/63 was one of the best books that I've ever read, and in all, I really loved it and would give it 9 out of 10 stars, minus 1 star for the meh ending. I would still recommend it to everyone, especially fellow history nerds, and I purchased this copy of the book for $8 at Target, and it was so worth it. I probably would have paid $50 if I knew how amazing this book was going to be. So anyway, I've actually heard that there is a Hulu original series based on this book, and I am definitely going to find a way to watch it, and I'm super excited to do so. Anyway, if you've read 11/22/63, or if you've even just seen the TV series, tell me what you thought of it. Do you agree with my points I made in this review or not? Make sure you give me your feedback in the comments below. Also, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for lots more videos coming soon. So thank you so much for watching this whole video. I know this was a long one. I appreciate you guys so much, more than you'll ever know. I freaking love you guys. Anyway, that's all for today. I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye!